Hey ladies, Judy Weber here, and welcome to this episode of the She Is Extraordinary podcast. I'm so excited to bring to you today my good friend, Kaitlyn Parker. She is a beautiful woman of God. She is a powerhouse as far as an entrepreneur, and she is the owner and president of Copy Uncorked, and she provides copywriting and brand strategy services to modern brands and creative entrepreneurs. Her client base is varied industries, which I love. She can do everything from retail to wellness to leisure to wedding photography to designers and so much more. Let's say hey to Kaitlyn.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Judy. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, gosh, it's such an honor to have you. So you have a great background. Every woman does. We all have come through the good and the bad.
Absolutely.
And I'd love it if you would share with the ladies kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of have a little bit of a winding path. I always played sports growing up. So from the time I was in middle school, my mom was my first field hockey coach, and I loved it and ended up playing through high school and even into college. So I did play at the University of Virginia, and that was kind of my life for a long time. And I majored in English. I thought I wanted to go into like broadcast journalism or something like that. But, when you're playing sports 24/7, it's kind of hard to, have the type of internships that you would need to do for that. But I always knew that I loved writing. I jokingly say I used to blog before blogging was cool, like way back in the day when people would like take horrible like flip phone photos of like what they ate or did that day and all of that. So that's kind of where I first started exploring writing. And then after college, I first worked in like a sales and recruiting job up in Baltimore, Maryland. And then deciding that wasn't necessarily for me, I found my way back kind of to athletics. And I worked for Lululemon for about 3.5 years and helped them open 3 stores, which is really where my love for like branding first took off. Obviously they're an incredible brand to learn from. And it really kind of started shaping, the first time I was writing like captions for the store. And when we were launching and creating like grand opening plans and all of that. And I didn't even know that half of that was copywriting or brand strategy at the time. It was just what I felt naturally good at and enjoyed doing. And then I ended up deciding I wanted to go back to school. And so I got my master's at a local Christian university called Regent. And that was like such a transformative time in my life of just really getting to like pour into my studies. I was studying strategic communication. So it was kind of like taking that English degree to the next level and learning how to apply it to the business world and to apply it to essentially marketing. And so I was like kind of learning what I was doing at Lululemon and having like words to describe it at this point. And then I just kind of continued studying the discipline of copywriting, taking various courses and stuff like that. And I started my LLC about 3 years ago now, and then went full time with it this past spring around the time that I rebranded to Copy Uncorked. And it's been such a rewarding career that I feel like God has just so perfectly timed. It's like, you almost have that nervousness sometimes of like, oh, okay, I don't want another client yet because my plate would be too full. Or then as soon as like you start working through the workload, you're like, oh man, where's that next lead going to come from? And then it just always would seem to kind of like land in my inbox. So it gave me a lot of confidence to, I guess, make that entrepreneurial leap. But I was fortunate in the sense that I was able to kind of build it up over time. So it did feel a little bit more like a sidestep into taking it full time. But it's something that I do feel like God has just really blessed and brought incredible people like yourself into my life. And so, yeah, it's been a very rewarding career that allows me to kind of use a lot of my different passions as I work with women in different industries. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh. I love it. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. That was a lot in a short amount of time. That was great. So I would love to go back to your college years.
Yeah.
And we had mentioned before we actually started, you had mentioned to me that you kind of went through a bit of a struggle.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing that for us?
Yeah, no, not at all. So, I think college years can be incredible and also really challenging. And, for me, having the pressures of being a Division I athlete and coming off of a very successful high school career, and it was just new pressures, and I think I put a lot of pressure on myself to succeed. And I ended up losing a lot of weight starting my second year and kind of experiencing a lot of depression and anxiety for the first time, along with a little bit of disordered eating. And it just became one of those things where back then I didn't have, like, I'm almost grateful to social media in a way of how like things like that have become so talked about, and we have names for it and there's community around it. And I think it perpetuated because I wasn't talking about it and I wasn't sharing it with other women or even my teammates. And, thankfully I was out of school where I had great access to doctors and support. My older sister was at UVA with me, and, I had so many great people in my world that were there for me, but it was definitely a very hard season for me. So I look back at college proud of what we accomplished. My team made it to the Final Four, and I had the incredible opportunity of experiencing those tournaments and competing at that level. And, also realizing that it took me a few years, to come out of that. And again, I think it's one of those things where God allowed me to experience some of that, and my compassion and just my passion for what I do and helping other women kind of start their own businesses and achieve what they're meant to do through starting with words and how they communicate about themselves, to really be empowered and pull them out of different seasons where they may be feeling indecisive or just feeling, unhappy where they currently are. So it's definitely just a big part of my story, but a time of my life that was definitely really, really challenging.
I so appreciate you sharing that. And as you're saying it, I also, when I was a freshman, I had an eating disorder, which I think stemmed from, I was, I guess, sheltered from a small town.
Yeah.
I didn't do much other than stay over at a friend's house one night. So traveling like 2.5 hours away to college was very hard for me, just homesickness. Yeah. And I think it manifested in like this stress about eating.
Yes. And I totally agree.
Yeah. And so for me, I'm so like, I have chills when you said that you didn't share it with anybody. My twin sister didn't know that I was suffering.
Yeah.
Like I kept it to myself. So I wonder how many ladies listening also through that.
Yeah, I know. And I think it's something that as Christians and as I've matured in my faith, I now know that the enemy loves using shame to keep us silent. And I think all of us as women, as men, as people, we have such an incredible opportunity to use our voice. And again, it's such a reason that I'm so passionate about like writing and copy and communications, because I think the enemy does like to silence us. And he does that a lot through feeling ashamed about the anxiety or the depression or the disordered eating that we're having. And it all kind of compounds itself. Like, I think mine definitely started as some anxiety and depression. And then that, ended up evolving into control and paranoia about what I was eating. And then as you lose weight, the anxiety gets even worse, and it's like you're fighting your physiology, you're fighting your psychology, and it just, it becomes really challenging, and you almost then end up having to seek out different types of help to kind of navigate and undo those different webs that become so entangled, So I think talking about it is hugely important, and obviously finding those trusted people, like sharing it on social media might not be right for everybody, but just going to the people in your world that you really can trust and allowing yourself to be open and vulnerable with them about what you're experiencing, because I think that just breaks the feeling of shame. It breaks the hold that the enemy has on us when he wants to keep us feeling that way.
That's right. I think that he loves to keep us isolated and in our own minds with this recurring craziness, which, as you're thinking of it, it's crazy, that it's wrong, but then you can't break out. So I just love you. And we have that in common. And I'm sure many that are going to be listening were like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone, or I wasn't alone when I thought I was, right?
Definitely not. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, I love copywriting, and I'd like to think I'm getting better at it, but you're freaking phenomenal. Ladies, you've got to check out copywriting.com. That is an entertaining site.
Thank you.
First of all, it's beautiful. The rebrand was amazing. I mean, it's gorgeous. And you offer so many freebies on there. So can you give us kind of 2 or 3 tips when it comes to getting that compelling headline or just hitting the right words?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges with writing copy and getting started writing copy is, we get in our heads and we overthink it. Mm-hmm. So I always try to tell people that one of the biggest things that you can do is really figure out what you want to say before you figure out how you want to say it. And once you kind of have a clear idea of like, okay, what am I trying to communicate here? Then breaking it down into bullet points, because it can be very intimidating to stare at a blank page and feel like the first 3 sentences that you write have to be award winning, you know? So I think breaking those things down into bullet points, both what the features of your product or service are and the benefits of your product or service. So kind of taking it one step further, I've used like something as simple as a toothbrush as an example. Like if they just say like, the bristles of this toothbrush are soft, you know, on the soft, medium, hard scale or whatever. To make that more compelling, you would say like, these bristles are soft for a more enjoyable like teeth brushing experience, or for like a softer mouth feel. Or so you can always ask yourself the question like, so what? So as soon as you make a statement about copy, then say, so what? Or kind of take it one step further to figure out why that matters to your audience, or why that affects their life. You know, what is kind of the benefit that they're achieving through that. So those would kind of be the first 2 things. And then the third thing I would say would be really just knowing who your prospect is. Of course, we talk about that all the time in marketing, you know, knowing who your audience is. But not just that, like kind of picturing them in the room with you. You know, how would you actually talk to them? How would you persuade them if you were having a glass of wine together, you know, at a table, or drinking a cup of coffee? And that allows you to have really your most authentic voice and really speak to those actual human pain points of why somebody could need your product or service in the first place. Sometimes we end up speaking with like an online voice that is very different from how we would actually communicate human to human. So I think at the end of the day, it's just remembering that you are ultimately selling to humans, and you have to figure out what about your product or service makes that person's life better.
Yeah, that connection is huge. And I think that the day that I realized that I should be directing this to one person,
yes,
you say,
yes.
as if they're in the room. That's
exactly.
key. You know, I mean, because I was, you know, I just turned 54 yesterday. And
happy birthday.
Thank you. I'm of that generation where it's like IBM, buttoned up, formal. Plus I'm a lawyer, so I'm just used to writing very formally. But now I realize, you know, I'm going to put gonna, because that's how I speak. I'm gonna, or do you wanna? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Using things like contractions. I feel like most copywriters will tell you like, forget the rules that your high school English teacher told you, like you're allowed to break them. And obviously different industries, you know, if you're a lawyer and you're marketing yourself, that's going to be different than an online coach would potentially market themselves. So I think it, again, comes back to, you know, who you're speaking to, what your profession is, but it's okay to use slang or use different punctuation or grammar or things in places that allow your voice to really like come to life and allow you to have more personality in your writing.
That's it, the personality and the brand. So I want to get into that. And yes, ladies, I've heard this, and I would think you agree, Kaitlyn, casual speech is like the new professional.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think so for sure. And what you mentioned about like the rule of one, so speaking to that one person in every, you know, piece of copy that you're writing is so hugely important. And again, it comes back to kind of like that one-on-one conversation. Like you wouldn't speak overly formal or professional. And I think people's eyes tend to glaze over when they're reading that type of copy. And I was just working on a tip post earlier today that talks a lot about using color, pattern, texture, and shine in your writing. So instead of saying like, instead of saying the word money, you could describe money using the word green, or, you know, instead of describing like the backyard went from green to white overnight to imply that it snowed, you know what I mean? Or using, like we said, you know, putting emojis in your writing, or using different punctuation or grammar or capitalization to add a little bit of texture, and, you know, using things like alliteration to add shine. So I think it is just, like I mentioned, knowing what you're trying to say, because our number one goal is really clarity. We can never go too far into creativity that our message gets muddled and people don't know what we're communicating, because if they don't know what we're communicating, then they don't have any interest in buying what we have to offer. So clarity is definitely supreme, but once you kind of get those core pieces mapped out, then you can go back in and you can play, you know, you can experiment with some of, you know, the diction or the word choice within each sentence.
Wow. I've got to read that blog post, what you just said, those 4 things. I can't remember them, but that was amazing. That was amazing. All right. So I just completed a branding challenge last week in my Driven and Equipped group. And one of the things that was really a stuck point for the ladies was this idea that you mentioned about having this ideal client. They were almost afraid to kind of go all in on that. I would love you to speak to the importance of that.
Yeah. So I can kind of use myself as an example here because, like you said at the start of the podcast, I work with different industries, but what I try to look at within that is what are kind of the adjoining attributes of all of these different people. And sometimes it's just, it's personality traits. It's, you know, I like working with other women who are professional in how they handle their business. If I'm working with someone B2B, people who are responsive, who value copywriting, who have a product or service with a core type of offering that I can actually go in and help them communicate and sell. You know, if we're starting kind of too soon, then copywriting might not be the perfect investment for them, more or less. So sometimes I think we get hung up on like demographic details or so on and so forth, but those details are just going to be really important in terms of how you want to price your offerings. So if you're telling me that you want to attract maybe a woman with a lower price point budget to invest in a service, but you're charging a premium, well, it's a little bit misaligned. So some of those details are sometimes important just in terms of how you're developing your actual offering. And then other times it can just be characteristics and traits. And it can come from, especially if you have a more personal brand, it can come from your own personality. You know, if there's a TV show that you love, then share that. Like, I know a girl that helps educate real estate agents as well. And she always talks about Friends, and she loves wine too. And she constantly shares those things, and those help her audience get to know her as well. And so I think start with as many, again, bullet points or traits that you presently know about this audience that you would like to work with. And then each time that you work with a new client or you have a new customer and you personally enjoyed the experience too, write down like more ideas of that person kind of embodies and why you enjoyed working with that person. And just, you know, you can get clearer and clearer over time of who that audience is. So it's not always black and white, but we just want to at least find kind of what all of the similarities are and compile as much information as we can about that person.
That's excellent. I love it. I love it. And there are a lot of real estate agents in my group because I used to focus, as you just mentioned, on real estate. And so they're just like, well, wait a minute. I don't know if I want to do this. And I say, why? And they say, because then if I want to go for the luxury market, but someone is like a first-time home buyer or something, I don't want to miss out. And so, but if I'm hearing you correctly, the purpose for the ideal client is to make sure your messaging is clear and resonates with them.
Yes, and so that it's who you ideally want to attract. So if they are wanting to go after that luxury market, then speak to that luxury market. That doesn't mean that they may not still get some leads for, you know, non-luxury home listings. And then it's their choice to decide whether they want to work with that client or list that home or not. But if we're essentially trying to communicate and market to everyone, as most people have probably heard, then we're essentially speaking to no one. So for, you know, different service providers, there may be services that they do offer, but they don't list on their main website because they're not necessarily trying to attract those services. So you always want to go for like, what is ultimately going to be the most profitable for you? What's going to be the most rewarding for you? And then if you think about it, like kind of like casting a net, you're still going to pull in some things, but we're ultimately trying to get as much of the ideal, you know, subject and person that we want to come through the door. So, you know, repelling as much as we can, but mostly just keeping the focus on what do we ideally want to work with? What's the best use of our time in marketing?
I love that. I love that. And I always tell the ladies, do it afraid.
Yes.
Trust the process.
Right.
And, you know, go all in, because just like you, I mean, you are all in on your brand. And I want to switch to that a moment. I mean, there you are wearing your sombrero, looking cute. It's so cute. And ladies, as I said, you've got to check out copyoncork.com, because you will see that Kaitlyn has this super cohesive brand. I mean, you know her. When you read even one page, even the opening homepage on her site, you will immediately feel like you know her. So can you take us very briefly through your rebrand? And like, do you have like three key words, like your brand, you know, how did you pull it together?
Yeah, so before I rebranded, the name of my LLC was KVH Creative. I just like knew I wanted to start the LLC. I knew I had to have a name for it. So I just went with my initials and the word creative. And then I got married, so those were no longer my initials. I was really focused on copywriting, and creative is so broad. It could mean design, it could mean art, it could mean a million different things. So I knew I wanted it to have copywriting in it. And I knew that I didn't want it to be my name anymore, simply because I wanted to eventually grow a team, and I wanted it to be a brand that my clients could have fun with and feel like they saw themselves in and be a part of, because copywriting can be one of those things where there's lots of great copywriters and it can be hard to differentiate yourself. So I tried to think about things that I know that I love and that I'm interested in, and like almost ways that I could bring in different metaphors to help explain a more complicated concept of copywriting, because not everybody understands it. Sometimes I say copywriting and people think like, are you a lawyer? Do you do like a copyright?
Trademark type copywriting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just kind of started thinking of different metaphors. Wine came to mind, and then the whole concept of like get your words flowing came to mind. And so I knew that I wanted it to be fun. Like that was definitely a core like principle of the brand for me, because that's not something that I always saw in other copywriting brands. It was still like kind of very sharp, and it was, you know, intense language. And I wanted people to just feel like it was approachable, like kind of like, you know, you could go meet friends at golden hour and have a nice happy hour together, and feel like you were learning in the process without that kind of immediate pressure. So I think just envisioning like first what you want the brand to be about, and because brand naming can be really challenging these days with how, you know, how many domains are taken and how many social media handles are taken, and try to just figure out, you know, okay, what is my industry? What do I like love about it? Like, how do I make sense of this concept that I can then communicate and educate it to other people? So that's how I ended up just kind of weaving the brand concept of words and wine together to ultimately make it something that people enjoyed being a part of.
I love it. I love it. And her fonts. I'm crazy about your brand. So
I did work with a really awesome brand designer, so I can't take total credit on the visual branding, but that was even a huge lesson for me too. I think, you know, as women, or, you know, as business owners have the savings, or they've invested, have the opportunity to invest in their brand a little bit more as you've saved over time, it was totally worth it to move from kind of like that DIY to working with other professionals in the space to come alongside you and really help me flesh out that concept even more. Like the woman I worked with, her name is Katie, and, you know, she helped me with illustrations and stuff like that could really bring it to life. And I think that that's, you know, the visuals are a huge part of it as well. I'm definitely a copywriter that is very passionate about design.
Yes, and it shows. And I love what you said about collaborating.
Yes.
And using professionals.
Yes.
You really want to get serious with your business. And ladies,
yes,
Kaitlyn is one of my Thriver experts in my signature program, Blessed to Thrive, which is a 12-week hybrid coaching and mentorship program. And Kaitlyn, if you could, want to give just a little bit of a sneak peek into what the ladies will find inside your module in the program.
Yes, absolutely. So it's about a seven lesson module, but very brief lessons, starting off with just kind of the copywriting best practices. So, you know, what is it? Why is it important for your business? What are some copywriting formulas that professional copywriters use to help you so that you don't feel like you're always writing from scratch? They're essentially like persuasion frameworks. So they are, you know, tested over time so that it allows you to make sure you're hitting on all the key points that we as humans need to rationalize the purchasing decision in our heads, and also kind of have that emotional component that gets us excited about what we're buying. And then, of course, research. So research is a huge part of copywriting. So I briefly touch on how you can do that, how you can use things like testimonials and, you know, comments throughout the internet on similar products and stuff like that to really formulate the needs of your target audience, like what they're looking for, and make sure that you're speaking to it using words that they would use to describe it. And then, of course, we touch on brand storytelling and what is actually meant by that phrase. I think sometimes people hear that and they think like, okay, do I tell my personal story? Like what is brand storytelling? So I talk about that, make it clear, and then help you figure out how you can actually break that down as well to create a story of your own. And then we also touch on, of course, just leveraging those formulas and research to make your writing easier, whether you're working on your website or whether you're trying to send out emails. And we go through the Copy Uncorked Master Checklist so that you can make sure that you have different copywriting components within your business. And when you need to pull from it to not be starting from scratch, that it again makes your life a little bit easier.
Wow. Wow, it is, and that's just one module of 12, and
yes,
that is a phenomenal module. I'm sure it's going to be a favorite from the ladies. So, all right, well, Kaitlyn, I can't believe we're pretty much out of time, but again, why don't we tell the ladies where they can find you, besides as a Thriver expert and have monthly opportunity to chat with you in that program, where can they find you online?
Yes, definitely check out the Blessed to Thrive course. And then you can connect with me at copyuncorked.com as well as on Instagram, Facebook at Copy Uncorked. So I'm mostly hanging out on Instagram, so I would love to connect with you there.
Awesome. Awesome. Kaitlyn, thank you so much for your time. It was such a blessing having you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Judy. I appreciate being here.
All right, ladies, we'll see you next time. Take care.